Welcome to the Jack T. Gordon Institute's Women, Peace and Security Forum. My name is Duilia Turner, and it's my pleasure to welcome you as we celebrate the anniversary of the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 with the book launch, Women, Peace and Security in U.S. Security Cooperation, edited by Dr. Susan Yoshihara, with contributing authors, including my chapter on strategic advising. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you will enjoy the discussion. Welcome to this wonderful event on behalf of the Jack Gordon Institute, our think tank at FIU. We are holding this event again here at the Glenn Herbert Library at the FIU Biscayne campus, and it's my pleasure to serve as the hostess with my team, Claudia, and our wonderful keynote speaker. I am Duilia Turner, the lead of the Women, Peace and Security Forum. Our event today celebrates the anniversary of the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325, which honors the contributions and lived experiences of women before, during, and post-conflict. And what a better way to celebrate this event than actually have the launch or relaunch of a very important book that talks about women, peace and security, and the security cooperation environment. So for our keynote speaker, we have the editor of such book, is Dr. Susan Yoshihara. She is, as I mentioned earlier, a champion for women, peace and security. She was a Navy pilot, has now contributed many years in academia, and was able to put this book together with the contributions of academics and practitioners, talking not only theory, but also practical application of the Women, Peace and Security framework. So with no further ado, Dr. Susan Yoshihara, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. It is terrific to be here. I want to thank Dewey again for inviting me down to beautiful Miami, especially as the weather has turned chilly in the nation's capital. And I'd also like to thank the Jack Gordon Institute at Florida International. It's a very impressive campus, and I've already met some very impressive students and alums. And I can't think of a better place to launch this book. This book is a collaboration of many security cooperation practitioners, Dewey among them, who is a contributor, and she's going to talk about her chapter as well. And it is a labor of love. It took 3 years. It is the fruit of my organization's work with the Defense Security Cooperation University. Next slide. So I want to introduce you to my organization. We launched 5 years ago in the nation's capital. It's the American Council on Women, Peace and Security. We have advised many policymakers, and we have a graduate course at the Institute of World Politics. We designed the security cooperation coursework for the Defense Department. We have internships and fellowships. We've advised not just DoD, Department of War, but also UN diplomats, Congress, the administration, and many other policymakers. So this is really the love. The love is to make great policy that really works for our national security. We have an online policy forum. I invite you to come to our website and to read our contributors. And we also love to do engagements like this. Traveling, we're doing book talks around the world. We're going to be traveling to the West Coast in the next 2 weeks. We're going to be in Monterey and San Diego, as well as Washington, D.C. And we also work on the ground in Uganda, where we have been working to promote an understanding and also addressing women who are survivors of sexual violence, but their children born of war often are not addressed in policy. And so that's something we've been working on for about 10 years. Next slide. So let me tell you about this book. Now, in April, the War Secretary announced that he was going to cancel Women, Peace and Security. Wow, just a couple months before the book came out. Now, if there's no such thing as bad press, then this is really great news for us because it really put it on the map. We've been fielding all kinds of questions from folks who had no idea what it was. And it was, you'll see through the talk that I'm going to give, you'll see why some folks think it was a necessary correction to get WPS on course as a targeted tool of national security. There are folks who have already written books about how this very niche area had become so laden with the hopes and dreams of so many activists and advocates that it had reached its carrying capacity. But for the United States, if it's going to be a going concern and it's going to overcome the concerns of things like the Secretary of War's concerns, then we need to get it back on track. And so this book is perfectly timed to address that national need. Next slide. So, women, peace, and security in U.S. security cooperation. I'm going to start with the second one. We have some practitioners of security cooperation right here in the room who have been working there for many years. The gem in this book is that we have voices from the field that are now going to be in the hands, not just of the military, but of academics and the public, so you can see what your country is doing in other countries with other militaries. The definition of security cooperation then is kind of important. It is any military-to-military engagement. We've been doing this since 1970 when we founded the Defense Security Cooperation Agency, and it's really about three things. We call it the ABCs of security cooperation: access, building relationships, and capacity building with partners that we want to work with. Pretty straightforward. Most of it is foreign military sales. In fact, big sales to Taiwan, Israel, Ukraine. Those make the headlines. What doesn't make the headlines is once you sell a capability, you also need to build the capacity to work with that partner. And that's where Women, Peace, and Security has been nested inside that capacity building. So it includes things like building the next generation military and including all of your population, including your very talented women, and perhaps in ways that they haven't done before. And the United States has been helping nations do that. It also shows you the return on investment that you get by investing in women. Because if you look at over $100 billion in security cooperation and the fact that the last time we budgeted for it, it was only $8 million for Women, Peace, and Security, the return on investment is great. When you invest in women, you get a great return on investment. Okay, so let's, last thing is to say, our security cooperation personnel are all over the world, 136 embassies. They fluctuate between 15 to 20,000, mostly military, but now also include civilians. So if you're interested in the workforce, security cooperation workforce, I recommend it. Next slide. Okay. Access to bases. I like this because this came from Al Jazeera. Notice that the Americans are in about 700 bases and lily pads in 80 countries. Now, a generation ago, that was twice as many bases, right, during the Cold War, but it was half as many countries. We're in twice as many countries now. That means twice as many countries, 80 nations, are on the ground working with. All the more reason that we need to ensure that those engagements are promoting the best of American values, like human rights and democracy or republicanism. Next slide. Okay, so what's WPS? Dewey has already given us a glimpse. It was a recognition 25 years ago tomorrow. The security cooperation passed its very first resolution. I was at the UN on Friday giving a talk about the 80th anniversary of the United Nations and the Charter. And when it was founded in San Francisco in 1945, women were right there. In fact, they were part of the Subcommission on Human Rights from the very beginning in San Francisco. They were part of faith-based organizations and labor organizations. And so women and civil society have always been part of this. But 25 years ago, the Security Council recognized that where were they? Why weren't they coming to the peace table? Why weren't they rebuilding societies? Why weren't they getting enough of the goods afterwards in order to help their families regenerate and grow their countries? And so they addressed that, and that's where this really came from. It was a very realist cause. How do we make better peace deals? How do we rebuild countries after war? Okay, and how do we prevent war? So these four pillars are sort of the notional pillars. Each country wields these a little bit differently depending on the need, but the participation of women has always been part and parcel of this. And in fact, you'll see that in the United States, that was sort of the focus of it. But protecting women and girls from all kinds of violence, especially sexual violence, and ending impunity for that kind of violence. Protection is very difficult, and then of course post-conflict aid. Next slide. Okay. The framework, as you can see, all this beautiful array of sovereign nations down here. These are the number of countries that had issued some kind of an action plan. But read it like this. If there are, say, 100 nations, now more than 100 nations, that have a WPS program, that's 100 different avenues of U.S. diplomacy with 100 different countries. Let me give you an example. You know historically that Japan and South Korea have had very tense diplomatic relations over the comfort women in World War II. However, did you know that in 2019 they signed on to an agreement together against sexual violence under the rubric of sexual WPS? What that tells you is that WPS can be a tool of diplomacy where other things don't work, a valuable tool, right? That's the idea. In these last 25 years, the Security Council has passed 10 resolutions, but nothing lately. There is a feeling that the carrying capacity has been reached, that Western nations are pushing for one type of WPS, other nations like the United States, China, Russia, and smaller nations who are protecting their culture and traditions are pushing the other way, trying to get us back to basics. So there's always been this tension between these two sort of top-down and bottom-up approaches. Next slide. But for our purposes, the United States touches back not to the UN Security Council, but to the US law. My organization was called in to advise on that law in 2017, and then also to help shape a strategy in the following year. And it's very simple, straightforward, less than 4 pages. It talks about women's participation, and it also talks about training. And the training you can see is on international human rights law, agreed frameworks. So we're on very safe ground when we stick to the US law. Next slide. It was passed by unanimous, bipartisan consent, and it was signed by President Trump in 2017. Okay, how do you put these two things together? This is the way the Department of Defense did it. It said, we're going to engage other nations in capacity building. How do you bring women into national security and work with them? Next slide. Okay, the reason we did this book. I was teaching between 50 and 80 students at a time in the middle of COVID online all over the world. And honestly, many of them expected another class in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and instead they got this class on something that they had never heard of. And I got emails saying, thank you, this is something I can really use in my work. This is not what I expected. But they did say, we want a lot less theory and a lot more examples. Give us examples. Show us what this looks like in the field. And this book is meant to respond to that need. Not just for today's students, but tomorrow's students too. What does it look like? Give us some cases, tell us the stories, put us there in the scene. And I'm happy to report that this book does that. But we also wanted to get a broader academic scrutiny. I really do think it's time that WPS breaks out of sort of the niche that it is and out to the broader security studies and military historians and other academic disciplines. And we wanted this book to get through an academic press to libraries so we can get that scrutiny. And that's going to be good for it, to shine a bright light on something that seems a little bit niche sometimes. And of course, help us chart the way forward. Now that this has become controversial in the United States and at the Security Council, how do we chart a way forward and save the gains that we have? And to ask this question, if you deliberately focus on women in national security, really advance your national security. All right, so that's kind of one of our questions. Next slide. And these are our cases. Again, in the middle, you'll have wonderful case studies, starting with an historical case study in Japan. Did you know that when he was flying over to Japan, he wrote Votes for Women in the corner, General MacArthur, before he occupied Japan? And that was a way of getting votes for women, was a way of bringing down the feudal society and the empire. And in fact, you'll hear the story of an incredible young woman who was there as an interpreter, who was in the room and who helped to make that happen. It's a great story. And we contrast that post-conflict situation to what happened in Afghanistan. The difference in those two countries, the difference in US policy, and that I think will be very important for not just historians, but maybe also for practitioners. Then you're going to be able to see country level advising, and then Dewey's going to tell you about her strategic level advising, and then you'll see some cases that I'm going to tell you about now. Next slide. So of course I wouldn't be a good academic if I didn't put a little bit of theory in this. There are contending theories of WPS, and you can roughly group them into 2 groups. WPS has been viewed from critical theory for a very long time. Critical theory upends sort of traditional studies of national security, sovereignty, and security, and that and feminism, I think, have informed most of the literature. We wanted to break away from that, expand it, so we have some who look at a feminist lens, and some who come from a realist lens, and some who just write stories as practitioners. But WPS can hold all of those. So we wanted to move beyond simply the critical theory. And the other thing we wanted to do is show that throughout these cases, you'll find that these two things are in tension. Those who are trying to make WPS a means of global gender equality, so one more tool in the gender equality policy, and those who are focused on national security. So there is something to base this on. We've got good research, not showing causality, but showing some good connections between when a nation has equality of law and policy between men and women. You also see excellent gains in national security, less authoritarianism, less interventionism, more peaceful, more prosperous. Okay, but the next one, next slide. And really, I think the turning point was in 2017. The United States chose to write a law, and things changed because that law is really focused on national security. And the implementation plans that flow from that necessarily were too. This did not sit well in a lot of places in the world. There were lots of UK, Australian, a lot of our allies said, "What are you doing making WPS about national security?" So this was a big move for the United States to go this way. But as we argue in the book, it was a winning move. So stabilizing countries, preventing and mitigating conflict by getting to the root causes, things like the trauma from sexual violence and from children who are not integrated, amnestied soldiers who can't be embraced because the women in the society never had a say in that peace deal. There are a lot of things that WPS does that aren't found in other constructs. So there's a lot of value to it. Female engagement teams is another example of added value. And it does best when it is really locked into things like diplomacy that recognizes sovereignty, culture, laws, accountability, and transparency. Now this last line, you'll say, what's a partner of choice? In a great power competition between the United States, China, Russia, other countries, we are really competing for partners on the ground. Remember all those bases that we need to keep ourselves secure at home in 80 countries? Well, we need to compete with China, who's also offering a lot of inducements. And so we argue, this is the argument of WPS and other aspects of our diplomacy, that by showing equality between men and women, countering tyranny, bolstering human rights, and promoting the facts on the ground for peace, we offer a much better partnership than does, say, Russia or China. Next slide. I'm going to give you just a glimpse at a few of the chapters, and then you can go buy the book. It's easy to find. There you've got a QR card in front of you. So this is a chapter that argues that when women are in peacekeeping forces, there's a stronger connection between the people and their government. Now, this is important in modern war. It used to be, this is Clausewitz's triangle, so all of my military friends will recognize, you gotta have Clausewitz's triangle over here between the people, the government, and the military. In traditional warfare, the military-government tie is extremely important. But our author here is arguing that in modern warfare, regular warfare, it's buying over those people really, convincing them that the government, especially a duly elected government, is more credible than, say, an insurgency or a terrorist organization. Women are really important here, and his argument is that he saw in Ghana, in teaching peacekeeping principles to the Ghanaian military, they already had a history of promoting women in their militaries, and that then, because they had sort of a culture of support, embracing women in the military, that they took it from there and they found that women gave them all these different things. Different skill sets, imbibed more trust into the people they were working with, and fostering trust and credibility of the regime was strengthening democratic governance. Okay, now there are folks who argue that this is not yet proven. Granted, this is anecdotal, but it's a great case for that line of civil military affairs. So if you're a civil military affairs expert, I highly recommend this chapter. Next slide. Another strength of WPS is its focus on analysis and planning, military planning. When you look at the whole of society, you have a better idea of what the battlefield looks like. No military planner doesn't want a better idea of what they're going into before an operation. And when you take into account considerations of the entire society, this author, Dr. Babin, argues that you would have had a much better idea of what to expect in Operation Allies Welcome. That operation in 2021 was when about some 70,000 Afghan guests or refugees escaped the fall of Kabul, came to the United States in 8 bases. And I guess we thought they were all going to be single men, but half of them were women, pregnant women with a lot of children. There was a baby born every day in these camps. Nobody really expected it. They were far away from obstetric care. It was during COVID. They didn't plan for all the children. And now you have military folks who are redeploying as armored divisions, and they're expected to be doing child minding and anti-trafficking and anti-sexual violence. And it's a real strain on an already laden force. And they did not have the benefit of this planning, where we knew 6 months out who was coming, really. We could have done this kind of planning from the applicants and then had in place the locations and the personnel to support that mission. Next slide. She also argues when it comes to the women, so many women, so many pregnant women, so many babies coming into these camps, that we could have done the same thing and had, as she was here, identified even when they got on the planes what state of pregnancy they were in, and we could have had on the ground and been ready for those eventualities. Next slide. Okay, and this one I love, the Afghan family. So when we talk about family members coming, as Americans we think mom, dad, 2 kids. But in the Afghan context, what came to the camps was husband, more wives than one, and many, many children from those wives, plus additionally extended families. And then again, this kind of context, she argues, if we were just to tweak the military planning a little bit with the systems analysis, in the future we can be prepared for this. Now, in my research with when I was at Northcom doing work looking at things like asylum seeker in New York and riots in Minneapolis, I talked about this kind of planning, and some folks said, "Why didn't we have that?" When we were trying to plan these different events of dealing with civilians. And I argue that right now on the border, anytime a military unit is in contact with a traumatized population that has been traumatized, it's a displaced population, it's protecting the troops when we take into account these human factors. And that's really what this is about as well. Next slide. Operational effectiveness, but also protecting our own troops. Another thing that we found in that mission, so we have a couple chapters on this mission, was the female engagement teams. Those had been used in Iraq and Afghanistan, been disbanded, never put into doctrine, and then we created them again in 2021. What I love about this book is we now have this in an academic book. If we have to create female engagement teams again, we've got some expertise in the book explaining how that was done, a handbook, if you will. So this is a drawing from some of the Afghan women showing these female engagement team members as angels in military uniform. Not only did they collect atmospherics, but in that mission, they found that women who had to get their children ready to go out into the community in 6 months, get them vaccinated, get them registered for school, etc. That information was hard to get to the women. It was getting to the men, but not the women. So they created tea rooms and sewing rooms and other avenues to educate the women in what to expect to join American societies. I think we're far enough along that we probably need a debrief on that to start to look for some of those and see how effective those female engagement teams were. But we have now a chapter where you can go and learn the story. Next slide. I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide except to say that this is how we've embedded WPS into these commands. The commands that are geographically based. If you can see that map, the U.S. military maps out the world into different geographic commands. I don't have to tell you in Miami because you have Southcom right here. So you can see Southcom, Northcom, and we have a WPS chief or advisor in each one of them, and they will have a team that engages and works with each of the embassies within their territory. Next slide. And they also create metrics so that they can work with the country to see how they're doing on WPS. Again, these metrics need to also be held to a very high standard of national security too. I know you do that in Southcom, and this is an example from North and Indo-PACOM, and they have a set of indicators, and then they can engage countries on the specific needs that they have. Next slide. Okay, here are the findings. Cons. We did find a real lack of clarity in the chapters, saying the policy just kept shifting from one president to the other, from one national defense strategy to the other, right? Are we including other groups or not? Is this intersectional or not? Are we including race or not? Are we including non-binary people or not? There was such confusion, I think, and in these two contending ideas of WPS that it really affected not just operations, but also the morale of the people doing the job. Clearly, that's something that needs to be very focused in the future. Far more training has to be done. Post-conflict reconstruction, I talked a little bit about that. But as I said, we found some real value in WPS and for continuing it in the Department of War, like the improvement of civil-military relations, closing those cognitive blind spots in planning, and protection and prevention through things like female engagement teams and cultural support teams. Next, and what we don't know. Okay, let me just stay on this for a second. Can, with this confusion at a time when there's very little appetite for bipartisanship right now in Washington, and there's a lot of contention at the highest levels of the UN Security Council, can something like this that touches on deep cultural values in countries and traditions, can something like this endure? And the answer is yes, if we make it so. But in order to do that, it really does, if you look at these cases in particular, have to be focused on national security, align with American values, and also with the values and the culture of the countries that we're working with. And that's just sort of job one, right? And that means that there's going to have to be a lot more education within WPS practitioners, and I think that it's not just DOW, also State Department and elsewhere. Next slide. This is what WPS 1.0 is the Security Council 25 years ago. WPS 2.0 was 2017 with the law. This is what we ended up at the end of WPS 2.0 in 2023. It was all about global gender equality, intersectionality, many, many different people besides women, very capacious, and it was about systemic change. Not just advancing women, but changing institutions, taking down the patriarchy, and really transformation of institutions. This obviously failed. This is what was canceled in April. Next slide. So if that's canceled, and that's not going to work, what will work? Well, targeted, clear purpose, in harmony with allies. Right? Our allies, a lot of our allies have socialist governments and feminist foreign policies. They take a very broad approach on this, and we must work with them, but not in a syncretic way, so much as a harmonious way. Again, always being true to our own values and the country's values. One place really underexploited in WPS is prevention. Because it's hard to celebrate something that never happened. It's hard to have metrics on something that did not happen, and yet it's so important. So ending impunity for sexual violence by UN peacekeepers that are funded by the American people, I think is a great place to start. And I think it's a winning, in fact, I will argue that it's winning both at the Security Council and in a bipartisan way. And it's something that's certainly supported by US law. And then just identifying what military specialties WPS belongs in, because it clearly doesn't belong everywhere. It can't do everything, right? It can't be everything to all people. But it seems that in security cooperation, this book shows you that there is some real value to integrating it into security cooperation, because it is a value added, an American value that we can share in common with those 112 or however many countries that have their own plans. Again, it's a way of listening to their advancements and sharing ours, and their cautionary tales and ours. So again, a wonderful security cooperation, I think, is a winner, and I'm sure there are others. And more scholarship, please. So if you're a scholar listening to this, if you're in history, security studies, any of the military sciences, please challenge us, advance the ball, tell us what, give us more examples and cases that we can work on. Next slide. All right, next slide. I have to end with my happy place. Next one. Oh, you took out the picture. That's okay. Go back. One more. Okay, so these are the cases. Very proud of them. I think we've really added to the literature, but I hope that this is only the first word on WPS and security cooperation, not the last word. Maybe my friend Dewey will be writing the next book. But here she is to talk about a really important case, and one that I think was really successful, and that is advising at a very strategic 4-star level. Again, a real value added for American diplomacy. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I'm so happy to hear your words and really this perspective. We need to have more academic, robust literature that help us use it as a compass, because women, peace, and security is in the human domain and can be very subjective. We can always have an opinion on what it is or how we go in one direction or another direction, but when it's backed by data, study cases, academics, practitioners, experience, it really can make a difference. And I think that is something that all of us that are experts in the domain of women, peace, and security appreciate, because there was a huge lack, and now we have a North Star that we can, it's not a one vision. The wonderful thing about the book that you so selflessly put it together is that is many perspectives. The perspectives are there. We can read them and learn from them and apply according to the culture, the environment, the institutions that we're working. So I really appreciate that. And with that, it's my pleasure to give you a little glimpse about the chapter that I wrote, which is advising at a strategic level. I, for 25 years, wore the United States Air Force uniform, and in my last assignment, in my last duty, while I was working as a military diplomat, I had a chance to be the first chief of Women, Peace, and Security for United States Southern Command. And it was a lot of trial and error, a lot of learning. But I think one thing that United States Southern Command got right is that under the leadership of Admiral Fowler, when the combatant commands were asked to implement Women, Peace, and Security after the Act of 2017 and then the strategies that follow in 2019, the commanders had sort of a freedom of how to apply and implement. And to the credit of Admiral Fowler, he saw the importance of the human domain. He really understood the capacity that Women, Peace, and Security could add to the mission. So he didn't put it in a directorate 5-6 echelons below him. He actually asked for Women, Peace, and Security, for our small office, to be directly under his specialist staff, which means we were organized with the congressional affairs, public affairs, and really the close hold advisors that we could go and talk directly with him and his staff and sort out what the law and what the strategy was asking us to do. So that gives us an advantage with the combatant commands, is that I had freedom to communicate directly with leadership. And we learned a lot through that. Initially, we were asking for volunteers to help. That did not necessarily work. Then we had internal guidance that asked for focal points that would help us apply the knowledge and what the guidance was asking us to do through logistics, operations, through exercises and training. And that, again, was a win after win once we were able to establish that. So I was very fortunate. Even though we had a very small team, we were able to do that very flawlessly throughout the command. And next slide, please. So here is, for instance, having that freedom of maneuverability within the command and being able to very quickly pivot and start working with our partners. This is just a glimpse. I started as the chief of WPS in 2019, at the end of 2019. But between 2020 and 2021, we were able to do 251 Women, Peace, and Security activities. We were able to reach over 150,000 people through exercises, through conferences, through training, through development, in over 36 countries, which means we reached out to countries even outside of our geographical command. We were able to work with countries in Africa, in Japan, Europe, all over. And what does it tell us is that we were able to get women, peace, and security out of women, peace, and security. That meant that we were integrated across all echelons. We have representatives in human resources, again, in logistics, operations, and we were meeting with them and saying, how can we bring this knowledge of understanding the human domain, different perspectives, to all of our military objectives within the command. And we were able to do that because of the training and the knowledge, not because of subjective approaches, but we really had a strategy to go through that. So I'm very pleased that our small team were able to do so many different things because we had that vision and because we had the leadership support, which is paramount. Next slide, please. So when we talk about women, peace, and security, I think one of the things that I write in the chapter is that it truly gives us a strategic advantage. Why? Is because 50% of a little bit even more in some countries, of our human population are women. And if we're only focusing on the men and looking at the men as the perpetrators, as the protectors and defenders, or as the leadership, we're really missing out in a huge segment of the human capital. So one of the things that I like to share when I was the chief of WPS within the command and now as an academic practitioner is that there are many different perspectives to women, peace, and security. Yes, women are vulnerable, and you're absolutely right. This whole piece of protection cannot be overlooked. The statistics don't lie. 70% of victims during crime, war, conflict are women and children. So yes, that's the reality, that women are victims, so we need to look in the protection piece too. But the other part to it is that women are also protectors and defenders. We're also champions. We're also humanitarians. Here, my dear friend Alison Thompson, she is the founder of Third Wave Volunteer, doctor that goes in places all around the world with severe crisis. And women are also perpetrators. They're also gang leaders. They're also part of transnational crime. And when we are looking at our military objectives and the strategy, our military strategy, defensive strategy, talks so much about our competitors. Over 60 times competitors, competitions. Who are we talking about? From a United States perspective, is China and Russia. So what is that we can do to gain an edge? Because technology will always match. The next weapon will be developed. The technology will match. But where can we get an advantage is in this human domain. So my first argument in the article is that we, in the human domain, have a true strategic advantage when we are connecting with women and men, elevating one another, creating those alliances. And you did talk about the access. Access starts with trust. We get the trust by knowing one another. Then we get the access. And then to meet our military objectives, we gain influence. So this is very important, and if we're neglecting a huge part of our population, we are really doing a disservice. So the strategic advantage comes in the human domain. Next one, please. So that's where we saw the human partnerships, where we start traveling and connecting with Latin America and Central America and the Caribbean. So you can see here, huge fan of Admiral Fowler, Ambassador Maines. We're there with the first woman to be a chief of defense in Jamaica, Wiseman Gorman. And back then, we were working with her because she is obviously an outstanding warfighter. And we were exchanging ideas and cooperating only to later know that she was going to be, the top leader in her defense forces. So with Admiral Fowler, and this other image in the middle, General Richardson in Colombia, she is she was a very strong pilot, helicopter pilot. So you can imagine when other pilots in Colombia, women, with their helmets meeting this 4-star general and seeing, wow, there's a connection here, someone I can really relate to. And I was in the room, I took that picture, and you just see the connection. You cannot break that apart. Those women are not going to stay stuck in the middle or low ranks of officership. They're going to continue to grow. And again, that gives us a strategic edge because we have role models and we have supported it and really helped them, and they have helped us to advance this idea of talent. Chile, Peru, talking about human rights, which is another important piece. and in Brazil. So we see many different opportunities to connect at a level that we start a conversation on women, peace, and security, but we take it out and we can see that through the years, through these relationships, it's a plan that perhaps China and Russia, they have a plan in Latin America, but they don't relate the way that we can, based on our values and based on our protection of human rights. How is China going to talk about women being a part of the puzzle if they have, gross crimes against humans, like human rights violations? The same thing with the Russians. So again, in the human domain, we get an opportunity to advance. Next one. Okay, I'm not going to talk about all this, but this is just a glimpse of this is a person to person, eyeball to eyeball, shake hands in developing relationships that are long lasting. And again, in the human domain, I think that's extremely important and cannot be overlooked, and that's one of the principal arguments in the chapter that I added to this fantastic book. Next one, please. So I had two case studies. I had one for Guyana and one for Colombia. At the Guyana, I would like to focus on the piece of trade winds. Trade winds is a military exercise that we do, that the United States Southern Command implements, multinational, multi-domain, very serious, and focuses on the readiness of the forces, the warfighters. So what is this? It's like we want to make sure that when we have an environmental disaster or we have a conflict, that we are able to seamless work with our partners, not just call and say, hey, can we get together to fight? We actually have practice and we play as we fight. So it's very serious. It goes in maritime domain, the ground, air, even cyber, intelligence, all domains. So we had the opportunity to integrate women, peace, and security in trade winds. Not only in any place that the trade winds took place, particularly for those next slides in Mexico, right, and in Belize. So you can see here just an idea of many specialties, diverse pilots, ground forces working together. And the idea that we had with Women, Peace, and Security is that we got in the wheel of strategy and planning. We went to every meeting as much as we could, and we asked warfighters, okay, you're doing here a target exercise. Can we include Women, Peace, and Security? You're working in the field. You're doing perimeter safety. How can we work with you and talk about those things? And I am a 100% believer that we can do WPS anywhere. Where there is a human breeding, WPS applies. So that's why it was very deliberate and it was very consistent, very successful. Next one. So I think the images sometimes talk quite a bit. So here you can see in Belize, this is a Belizean soldier. She was working with us in talking about the principles of WPS. We see an army soldier. We see different contexts here. Dr. Lantigua, who at the time was a Northcom, teaching in Mexico. And we have classroom environments where we are getting the warfighters in big spaces, small spaces, with backdrops, with microphones, with sign language, whatever we needed to do to share this idea that you need to consider in very real ways the various perspectives in the human domain. Next one. Circles. And we're talking about women, peace, and security. And one might think, well, what are you talking about with these guys in the field? They're actually working in perimeter safety and working in the jungle. This is 5 miles into the jungle. And what we're talking about is really, what is professionalism? If you have one woman in your team of 5 or 10 and she needs to use the restroom, what do we do? If you're doing a perimeter security and you see that your opponent is a woman, what do you do? How do you handle those? If you are able to capture someone and is a man, a woman, what do you do? So we're talking about a very tactical, very garrison level. What are some of the practices and fundamentals of women, peace, and security? And we did that for everything. For the maritime, now we're talking with people on a boat. Now we're talking to a navigator. Now we're talking to an intelligence officer who is doing analysis, who might not notice that understanding the fact that there are no women around or too many women around in an intelligence analysis can change the whole perspective of how we do the next steps on a mission. So those are some of the things we spoke. Next one. And here just you can see that a lot of snipers, we're talking aviation, we're talking all kinds of medical, so it's really multi-domain. Next slide, please. The second piece that I talked about was Colombia. And Colombia is one of my favorite cases because what I saw in my experience, not only when I went with General Richardson, but working with throughout the years with Colombians, is that the women are very connected, the women in the military ranks. And that speaks a lot because I normally didn't see that. I see a lot of competition because there's one woman in the room and now the other one doesn't feel it. This unfortunate reality that happens. But in Colombia, what I saw was a lot of support towards one another, particularly on the senior enlisted ranks. So it was not to my surprise that we saw the first, what's called the SEAC, the Senior Enlisted Advisor, which means the most senior enlisted person that advises the most senior officer in the armed forces, a SEAC, the first SEAC woman, and I think it was in the world, the Command Sergeant Major Consuelo Diaz, and she's from Colombia. And they have WhatsApps and they have messaging systems where they support one another, they celebrate their promotions, they help each other to become sharper in every way. So it's just a fantastic case study in where we see not only the institution made some strides, although slow, just like in many countries, slow strides, but in Colombia, that human perspective where the women really are connecting and working together made a lot of difference. And I think that's a lesson that, when we're in a competitive space, we can learn from the Colombian senior enlisted women. Next one, please. Okay, so just to conclude, I think what I'd like to highlight is 3 points from the chapter. The first one is the human connection and how it gives us a strategic advantage for security cooperation, and truly is the foundation, can be a foundation for our United States partnership. The Women, Peace and Security Framework, as the second point, is strengthening our operational readiness, which means we take it out of the strategic framework, this idea, the law, the strategy, the big idea, and we translate all the way to the ground, where we're boots on the ground and talking about toilets for women. And things of that nature. And for men, because we really want a cohesive force, right? That's professional, that's ready to fight, that when we go and you look at your side and we are in a contentious situation, that we don't have to even think about, oh, I have a woman next to me, I feel uncomfortable. That should be ironed out and long gone before we even engage in any mission. So those are the pieces that keeps us more ready and to accomplish our objectives in terms of defense and security. And the third one is that women, peace, and security is a force multiplier because we are really not making concessions. The idea is not to making concessions so we can add another woman and showcase that, now we're mixed and we have like a really good balance. The idea is that we're looking for the best talent, the talent that speaks louder than gender, than any other nuances. We want to see the best person for the mission, the most qualified. And when we take women in consideration, we really see that it is a force multiplier. Not only for the talent, but again, I go back to my point 1, but for the human connections that we miss when we don't take those aspects in consideration. So that's the gist. I invite you to buy the book, read the book. There's some QR codes. The other fantastic contributors, we are all friends, we know each other, and again, it's not a one vision type of book. There are different perspectives. Different points of view, and it's really fascinating to see. So with that, I want to thank you again for being a champion and for adding to the literature in such an elegant way and really closing the gap. And I want to invite my team member, fantastic Dali, because she's going to be our questions and answers moderator. So Dali, welcome and thank you for you being here, and thank you, Susan.